Right, welcome back everybody. Hope you enjoyed your little break. I'm really looking forward to this. You're going to learn something completely new if you don't know about biometrics. So this is user testing with biometrics. And we've got Michael Dravnieks, who's from Coast Digital, who is a user experience consultant, who's going to tell us all about it. Looking forward to this.
Cool, thank you very much. I'm going to talk about user testing with biometrics. I'm also going to talk a little bit about why we test, how we test, more traditional ways of testing, and how that all kind of fits into our process. And the biometrics bit I'll get onto where I sort of show you some of the new technology that we've got at Coast and our new lab that we've got recently set up. So I want to cover three topics really. I'm going to talk about testing as part of a UX process, how and why we test, and then how recently we've started taking our user testing to the next level. I'll do a bit of a boring intro to myself. So as mentioned, I'm a user experience consultant or a UX consultant. In the past, I've been a visual designer and a web developer. But at Coast Digital, I'm very much a user experience consultant. I've been there for 6 years, and we're a team of 50 or so. We seem to be constantly growing. We celebrated our 17th birthday last week, so been around for a while, and we do mostly online marketing, but we have a user experience consultant role or two, and we focus on web design and build. And the UX team kind of works with online marketing and with website developers and designers and kind of see projects through from research to launch. We've worked with some of these companies. You might recognize some of these logos. And the reason I put these ones on the screen is because they're the ones that I've been involved with and that we've run the kind of process that I'm going to talk through today with, and that will all, they have all had kind of testing as part of that process as well. So testing as part of the UX process. What I want to do kind of first is define what a UX process kind of looks like to us. So if you go onto Google and you search for UX, you see diagrams a bit like this, or like this. And really what this is telling us is that there is a lot to UX, and it can mean a lot of different things to different people. There isn't really like this one single definition. It's more of an umbrella term that kind of incorporates things like research, interaction design, information architecture, prototyping, you name it. But the really cool thing about it is truly it's flexible. So whether you have like a really big project or a small project, there's always a place for user experience design, and it scales really nicely. But the most important thing is that when you're going through one of these UX processes is that users are at the heart. So when you're designing with them in mind, you're talking to them, you're understanding their needs, you're taking a step back from just producing really nice visuals or focusing on this like really fixed process and unpacking that and just thinking, what do the users need, understanding what their experience is going to be like, and then designing for them. So this conference is all about the process, so I wanted to run through a typical UX design and build process for us. So we kind of start with this initiate phase where we go through planning and comms. And then we'll move on to a research phase. So UX is about understanding users, so a research phase feels natural there. Then we'll move on to a UX design phase, which is much more traditional, where we do things like site mapping, wireframing, information architecture, all the stuff that sort of produce these really nice looking assets, but at the core of it is this understanding of users. Then we'll move on to a visual design phase, and then a build phase, and then eventually launch. So this isn't really anything too groundbreaking. This probably feels quite familiar to most people. But if we dive into some of the detail here, we can look at where testing really fits into all of this. So there's our initiate phase, and then within research, we'll have a user research piece within there, and you can see this is where biometric testing might start to come into play. So this is before we kind of really designed or built or planned anything. Quite often we'll run a test where we'll look at a client's existing website or whatever their assets are, and try and unpack their brief a little bit. So if they say to us, we've got this problem, this problem, this problem, we won't just kind of take that as a given. We'll try and sometimes rewrite their brief by doing some testing on their site and try and figure out like where the real areas of improvement are, and not just sort of kind of follow a brief because we may be missing something that's really important that we could have picked up on if we've done some early testing. Another place we'll do some testing is through this UX design phase. So I mentioned wireframes, sitemaps. So wireframes are a great way of doing testing early on in the process. We can create things like clickable prototypes to test with before we move on to the visual phase, where again we can kind of create more high fidelity prototypes to test with. So you can see there throughout this process we've got 3 testing loops there. That might be more in a larger project, or in a smaller project we may only do 1 or 2. But there's an example of where testing fits into a typical kind of UX design and build process. So the kinds of things that we might test throughout here. So between research and design, we might, as I mentioned, test a low fidelity prototype. So this could just be like black and white wireframes, or we might have some visuals, some real content in there, hopefully, but not always. So yeah, testing a low fidelity prototype early on, which is really good because by their very nature, wireframes are quick and easy to update. There's no colors, fonts, visuals, there's no like design layer yet. So it's a great time to test with wireframes because they're quick and easy and rapid to prototype with. And then as we move on from design to development, we can test a more high fidelity prototype, again, just by putting like flat Photoshop visuals together into a clickable prototype in something like InVision, and testing again before we actually start building things. So testing throughout the process is absolutely key. When we go to test, these are some of the questions that we want to get answers to, really. So why testing is important. Is our website achieving what we set out to achieve? Is it really ticking all the boxes? Is it hitting all the marks? Can the users complete tasks that we set them? If they can't, then the website is going to fail when it launches if people can't do the things that they're going on that website to do. So nobody really visits a website just for the hell of it. They go there because they want to find some information, they want to find contact details, they want to fill in a form or get a quote, etc. If they can't complete these tasks and we haven't picked that up and tested it early, then the website is never really going to be a success. And how do they go about completing these tasks as well? Typically, we'll design user journeys, and as UX designers, we get a little bit obsessed with user journeys. But when you put a website in the hands of a user, they'll find their own way around it. And it won't always be the way that you kind of planned out and mapped out. So let's observe earlier on how people are using the site, and then maybe we can take that on board as we make changes throughout the process. And the results will invariably lead to changes. But as I mentioned, if you test early, then it's easy to make those changes. If you're testing the website just before it launches and you're in code, then it's going to be a lot harder and a lot more expensive to make those changes when you're writing in code as opposed to just kind of working within a sketch file or an Excel file with wireframes. Because creating a website can be really, really expensive. So don't risk it by testing at the end. Test early and test often. And really at the heart of testing, it's about understanding users' behavior and generating empathy. And there's kind of 2 ways to really do that. So the first is to understand people by observing them. And this is kind of how we traditionally test. And the other one is kind of by putting yourself in the situation of the end user, by actually going up and running through your prototype and signing up for the thing yourself, or trying to find that bit of information yourself. This is sometimes called eating your own dog food, which I don't really recommend. So let's talk about traditional testing before we get on to biometrics. So the way that we traditionally have tested is using this kind of observation method. So we'll set tasks for users, we'll observe them, so we'll take notes, we'll record the session, and then play it back and kind of take the findings from there. We'll typically ask questions throughout a testing process or do an exit interview. So at the end, ask the user, how did that go? How did you find that? Tell me about it. Goodness. Sorry. I'm going to stop moving around so much. Maybe that's what's causing it. I'm going to put that there as well. Cool. Sorry. So yeah, we'll typically interview someone who's being tested as well. So the drawbacks of kind of doing it this way are that you have to manually aggregate all those findings. So say if you've run 20 tests, you have to go back and watch 20 videos. You have to read through your 20 sets of notes. You've got to go through 20 interviews and kind of write them up. Sound guy, help. What can I do to make this stop happening? I'm really sorry. Just stand still, stop moving around. There. Can you still hear me? Yeah. Okay, cool. Right, I'm just going to carry on. So manual aggregating findings can take quite a while. It's like really labour intensive. So if you do like 20 tests in a couple of days, it can take you then 2 weeks to kind of write up everything and take all the findings from that. The other thing is that you're going to be really reliant on the test subject being articulate. So we ask them to kind of describe what they're doing and tell us how they're feeling throughout the test. But sometimes when we do tests, people are so concentrating on like what they're doing and looking at the website, they forget to talk, and you have to kind of ask them, how do you feel? And they're not necessarily able to communicate how they feel or whether they're enjoying it or struggling with something. So that's a bit of a drawback as well. And sometimes they can, when they do articulate how they're feeling or whether they're struggling or getting on well, they only really do that when they have quite a strong reaction to something. So you don't really pick up these micro reactions, which biometrics can help with. And sometimes you have to question whether what the test subject is saying is actually even really accurate. So, for example, I tested a prototype that was just black and white. It was wireframes, and someone told me they really liked the design of it. It was perfect. It was purposefully under-designed, but sometimes they'll say, oh, I love this website. Oh, it's really easy to use, but you've seen that they've kind of struggled with it. So that's a bit of a drawback as well. So let's look at how we can take this further with biometric testing. Which sounds really futuristic, and it kind of is. But we're kind of doing a lot of it already, so you're probably familiar with some of these methods of kind of biometric feedback. So unlocking your phone with your fingerprint, right? So that's using biometrics, as is unlocking your phone with your face. So that's biometric too. Hands up who's got one of these? Like everyone. Yeah. So I mean, this is another example of biometric technology, right? So it recognizes your voice and it executes commands. And I think actually with the Echo, you can actually set it so it only recognizes your voice, so other people can't come around your house and put bad music on. Oh no, the sound guy's coming. What am I doing wrong? I'm really sorry.
I think it's too loud.
Am I too loud? Am I talking too loud? Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
So another one was, who remembers this thing? I think they discontinued it. So it's the Xbox Kinect, which used to use to play kind of cool games by flailing around in your living room and bashing into each other. But this is a really cool example of biometric technology, actually, because I think it sort of scanned your body and created this skeleton composition, and then it would use that to move things around the screen and give you feedback. I think it's been discontinued, but that's another really good example of biometrics being used within technology already. And I think that came out in like 2010, maybe even earlier. So biometrics are futuristic, and they sound really futuristic, and they are, but they've been around for a little while. So how do we test with them? So at Coast, in our lab, we have 3 different types of sensors that we're using to test with. So eye tracking, which you may already be familiar with, is kind of one of the most traditional ones. And then galvanic skin response and facial recognition. So eye tracking first. So we do eye tracking with this Toby sensor, which is pretty cool. It works really with like a desktop and a mobile setup. So this is our mobile rig here. So you kind of put your phone or your tablet in there. That's the facial recognition camera at the top. And then this is the eye tracking sensor at the bottom. And it works by shining kind of a infrared light kind of into your eyes. You don't really see it or even know that it's being done. And then it reflects that back onto the screen and gets feedback that way. So it fits on a mobile rig, but then it also goes underneath. It just kind of clips onto the bottom of a desktop screen as well. And eye tracking kind of really gives you sort of 4 things overall. So it can tell you which elements attract immediate attention, which elements attract above average attention, if some elements are being ignored or overlooked, which is like a huge one, and the order in which elements are noticed. So you might put this big banner or this big button at the top of your homepage, and it's not getting the clicks that you thought it would be, or people aren't converting from the homepage, they're going somewhere else. So with eye tracking, we can see, are people really looking at it? You know, are they? We use heat maps traditionally to see where people are moving their mouse, but we can't really see where people are looking without eye tracking. So we can really, with eye tracking, get a sense of where people are looking, in which order, and what they're really kind of fixated on. So here's this is an example. This is a video that uses some eye tracking. So the key thing here is you can see the little red mouse cursor, and then you've got the circle, which is where the person's looking, and they aren't always going in the same place. So before, when we've done heat mapping and testing, we've always kind of thought, well, people look where they're putting their mouse. But you can see here that's not really the case. The mouse is going over here, and then the eyes are going somewhere else. And you see when that circle gets bigger, that's when our test subject is kind of focusing on an area for longer. And we kind of get that data at the end of it. So this is we've asked him to find the library on the university campus, and he's kind of struggling with it, looking all over the place. It's sped up a little bit.
I was going to say.
He's had far too many coffees, this guy. Cool. So the data we get out at the other end of this is, I'll start by saying there's a lot of it. But the main ones is we get heat maps. So we can, heat maps are quite a familiar thing for UX designers. So you get these heat maps of where people are looking, which is really cool. You get gaze points, which are areas that people have looked at, and then fixation points where they've kind of stopped. A gaze point is where they've kind of moved their eye across something, and a fixation point is where they've kind of stopped to look at something, and then you can gather data on how long they've looked at it and that kind of thing. The other cool thing that you can do is set up areas of interest. So if you're particularly focused on, I don't know, the banner at the top of a homepage, or a particular button, or a particular call to action, you can set that up as an area of interest. And then you can see here you get some specific data on that area of interest. So that TTFF is time to first fixation. So how long it takes a test subject to look at that particular area of interest. How long they spent looking at it. So here, 0.3 seconds. So it took them 38 seconds to find it, and they only looked at it for 0.3 seconds. And then how many of your test subjects within a session actually do look at it as well. So they're the ratio. So it gives you a lot of data, and you can really, really get deep with this. If you set up multiple areas of interest, you're going to get a lot of data out of this. So you can really, really fine-tune a design by just using eye tracking on its own. So the next sensor that we have is a galvanic skin response sensor. So this kind of measures the amount that you're sweating in your hand when it's fitted there. Now, true story, I was going to show you a video of someone skating at the top of a roof, just to kind of to prove that when you look at things like that evoke quite a strong emotional response, that your hands will start to sweat. But when I was editing this video, my hands were sweating so profusely, I was like, I can't show that to anybody. I felt really uncomfortable for about an hour afterwards as well, so I'm not going to do that. But that might have actually, just this image alone might have provoked a small reaction from you. Sorry. So that's what the galvanic skin response sensor does. This one is a shimmer. And so we get a few bits of data from here. There's two main ones. One is the heartbeat. So when someone's getting excited or annoyed or frustrated, their heartbeat will change. And also we'll see the emotional response change as well. So you have 3 million sweat glands in your hands and feet. So there's a lot of sort of data that we can pick up from there. I think the really key thing about this, though, is that you can't control that. So with, say, facial expressions, which I'll come on to, some people can control their facial expressions quite well. Some people are really have good, strong reactions to things, but you can't control how your body reacts to things when you are aroused or you have an emotional response to something. So there's no kind of fooling this. And so what it really does is it's measuring arousal. It's measuring an emotional response to whatever the stimulus that you're showing somebody. So whether it's photos, videos, could be video games. It measures those kind of like positive and negative moments where they're frustrated or happy or surprised. Your skin will give a response to that emotion, and we'll be able to track that. The downside of the skin response is that actually it can't tell us whether the emotional reaction that you have to it is positive or negative. It just says that there is a reaction. And the peaks will look identical whether it was like, I'm really frustrated or I'm really happy. So we can just see peaks and troughs, but it doesn't really tell us much more than that. So the strength of the galvanic skin response sensor comes when you add in, well, the eye tracking, but also facial recognition analysis as well, which is our third sensor that we have. So this is a little camera that sits on top of a desktop monitor, or again, we can test mobile and tablet apps as well, because it fits onto our mobile rig there. And hopefully you can see that. We've got our two test subjects there, and it works by kind of plotting these little points over their face, so in their, around their eyes, nose, mouth. And then there are seven emotional responses that it can track. Now, hopefully, when you're testing your website, nobody pulls this kind of face. Well, actually, they're all pretty over the top. But so they're strong examples of facial expressions. But I mentioned micro expressions earlier on, and that's the real strength of this, because some people are just really calm and relaxed when you're testing them, and they don't really give much away. The skin response will tell you whether they've had a reaction, but what we're looking for then in this case is micro reactions. So just a small smile or a lift of the eyebrows can indicate joy, surprise, etc. And this is the kind of data that we get from that. So on the right here, we've got all these emotions that are being tracked, and so you can kind of see peaks of where someone's going through a test, whether they feel surprise, delight, anger, etc. And we get kind of a score between 0 and 100. So where you've got those big spikes, they're 100, and sometimes people just have these sort of minor reactions, but they can sometimes tell you a lot too. So again, when you have people who just give away kind of micro expressions, if their baseline kind of level of expression, they're not a very expressive person, then you will only get kind of a small bump there. But when you combine this with the skin response, which they can't control, that can tell you a lot more about how someone's feeling when they're kind of in the middle of a test. So I'm sure I'm running out of time. Dean just grabbed the 5 minutes thing. So when we put all of this together, we get something like this. So on the top left, we can see the subject. So we can see what he's looking like, what he's doing, what he's physically doing, which can tell you a lot. So like giving physical feedback. We can see where his eyes are looking in the top right, and then we can see like the emotional reactions and the facial expressions that he's pulling below. And you can scroll down, and there's quite a lot there. So I'm just going to run a video so you can see how that's all kind of put together. So the task here is we asked him to find a library on campus, and you can see he's looking around. You can see his face and the expressions that he's pulling. So you see this big yellow wave coming up. This is anger. There's quite a lot of anger there, actually. And then he moves over to the navigation on the left, so his anger dips. He's like, okay, he's full of hope again, and then he comes back to anger. I think he might just be quite an angry guy in general. I work with him. Yeah, so we can. So I mean, this is giving us a lot of raw data, and the really cool thing is that there's so much data you can kind of use it in whichever way works for you on your project. So you can kind of just skim the surface and look at the reactions that people had during a test, or you can go into a lot of detail and really start, with a lot of tests, start aggregating tons and tons of data, because it spits out this huge spreadsheet at the end, so you can kind of use it to compile your own kind of findings and really, really get deep if you want to. And typically we'll use this to kind of plot out some kind of emotional journey maps. So we can see here that it started off well, then went downhill, he recovered when he found the navigation, things got much better, and then he still couldn't find what he wanted and ended up giving up. So we can plot out these user journeys using these 3 types of sensors that we got. And it just gives us so much more information than we had before when we were testing just observing somebody and talking to them and trusting them and asking them questions and hoping that they would give us good feedback. These sensors tell us much, much more than we got from just kind of talking to people, because it gives us their emotional responses. We can aggregate all these different kinds of facial expressions that people are pulling when they're testing, and we can see what they're really looking at rather than what just they're kind of running their mouse over. So just to kind of go into a little bit of a sales pitch, we have a lab here in Colchester. So one of the biggest barriers for testing with this kind of stuff in the past for us has been that we always had to travel quite far, hire a lab for the day. It's been quite expensive. The cool thing is there is now a biometric testing lab in Colchester in our office. We kind of set it up to look a little bit like a living room, which is nice and comfortable for people when they come along. But it's also completely portable as well, so we can pack this stuff up in suitcases and travel to London or travel around with it. So that's quite cool. We can go out. We're going out to the university next week to do some testing over there. Right, I'm going to stop crackling now. And if you want to know more about biometrics, come talk to me afterwards. If you want to hire a lab, get in touch with us. Otherwise, thank you very much.